So for those who don't know me, I'm Juliet. My husband and my family came to Hope Apps about 3.5 years ago. I have my husband and my two very wonderful children. I was asked to do this about 2 years ago, and then we've obviously gone through COVID. So this is something that's kind of shaped over the last 2 years, and it's not necessarily that it's changed. There's been a couple of alterations made, but for me, in reflection, God was there from the very beginning of my life. At 6 weeks old, my parents emigrated here from England, and they were very devout members of the Church of England, which, for those who don't know, is an Anglican church. But at 6 weeks old, my parents decided to take me and head straight back to England. And I was christened over there. And though I obviously look back at that and see, you can't really baptise babies, but it was one of those things that I look back on and I think my dad very much believed in a solid foundation, that God had to be there from literally 6 weeks old. I mean, don't know about anyone else, but I don't know what it would be like to take a 6-week-old baby on a plane. And some of my earliest memories are being in the choir, singing the hymns that we sing now at 3 years old with my nan and my mum and my dad. And we're a very musical family. And it's one of those things I look back on, I'm very, very grateful that my dad from the beginning had that solid foundation, that God was the most important thing. At 8 years old, my mum fell sick with both rheumatoid arthritis and rheumatic fever. And this was a huge problem for our family. This is back in the 90s. So I was only 8, and my sister, I've got a younger sister, she was 5. And we basically had doctors and nurses at our house every day. My mum was exceptionally unwell. So we kind of just stopped. Church was on the back burner. And we never actually went back. And it was during this time where my dad was working 2 jobs. My mum pretty much couldn't look after us. She couldn't look after herself. So I was left with the responsibility of my sister. And I looked after her, took her into school, and she had horrendous separation anxiety. I'm taking this vomiting, shaking, crying 5-year-old child as an 8-year-old into school. And in my head, I don't know how this happened, but I remember thinking to myself, I never want to be a burden to my parents. I never want to be a burden. I never want to be a problem. I have to be perfect all the time. This was to the point that when I was 11, I nearly died from my appendix exploding. This was before keyhole surgery, so it wasn't just a quick surgery. But for those who don't know, if your appendix explodes, you've got about 4 days. Back in the day, you would die if your appendix exploded. I got to 3 days, and at this point, my legs no longer functioned. My whole lower system had given up, and this was out of me fearing being a burden to my family. Eventually, I was rushed to hospital and spent the next 6 weeks in recovery coming out of that. And that was at that point my parents realised if she says she's in pain, she's in pain. So, because I can easily push it aside. My dad was exceptionally controlling. He was very strict. He's also very tall. So he was someone who was quite a intimidating individual. And as much as I loved him, I was also very afraid of him. Once my mum's, she was a bit more under control, and I went to a Christian high school. Again, though we weren't at church, Dad still wanted that solid foundation. We'd pretty much left God. It was very much, we never spoke about it at home. And it was at high school I started playing piano. And that kind of fed into my perfectionistic attitude. I'm very much a perfectionist and exceptionally self-critical. I was told yesterday that I come across as the type of person who's not anxious or not nervous or not worried, and as you will all learn today, I am the polar opposite of that. My whole thing of not being good enough became to absolute perfectionism, and it became something that completely ate I was very intelligent, very musical, very social, very loud, very in your face, and I became the very opposite of that. I retreated into nothing. I was constantly paranoid of being a burden to my parents. And this ended up becoming, there was a bit of a strain on the relationship with my parents. And this level of anxiety and the level of self-criticism that I had ended up leading to me being diagnosed with major depression, bulimia nervosa, and generalised anxiety disorder when I was 16. I was very unwell, yet because it was all in the mind, my dad and mum had both pretty much said to me, it's not our problem. They grew up with a very different understanding of mental illness. I finished school, was, the top piano player at school. I went and did my Bachelor of Music at Monash University. And during this time, I also attended an outpatient clinic for eating disorders where I was at for 3 years. And I was basically there Monday to Friday, learning how to heal myself. At 18 years old, I paid for this entire process myself. My parents were not involved, which was pretty much no one else who attended there had that situation. I'd pretty much distanced myself from my parents altogether. My dad and mum wanted nothing to do with any of it. And I'd kind of come to the conclusion that they are just humans like us, and that's just how it is. I'm not going to have a relationship with them. But what happened was when I was receiving at the Oak House, I'd also come to this conclusion that I'm not someone who can be helped. I was told numerous times I'm too smart for my own good, in that I already knew what I needed to do. I knew exactly all the things that they were telling me. I knew what was going on. I was very eloquent at being able to describe what was going on in my mind, but I couldn't do anything about it. I became a bit of a counsellor for everyone else that was there as well, and that was fine, but it did mean that I exhausted therapy. It was going nowhere. At this point, I was heavily medicated on antidepressants, and this all kind of came to a head in 2008 when my dad had a major stroke. He was only 48, so for those of you who think strokes can only happen to old people, that's not true. He should have died. And it was one of the things where I look back at it, and my dad is a different man now. He's no longer strict, he's softened. He is a very gentle man, and he also understands that just because you can't see things that are wrong doesn't mean that everything's fine. And this may sound presumptuous, but I do feel that God had a hand in this situation, because of this situation, he actually turned around to me and said, I'm sorry for how hard I was on you. And I'm sorry for not acknowledging how rough things were. And I feel that that this happened to Dad for that reason, because he's no longer the man that he was. I then started teaching piano, and at this point, God had been there. I went to a Christian school, but really and truly you learn nothing. And I was teaching piano, and through that I ended up becoming involved in a Pentecostal church where I played keys. And I have never felt so empty. I have never felt so... They preached, everyone was loved, and you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to be this, but these people, their lives were perfect. These people, and I know they weren't in hindsight, I'm fully aware they're not, and we all present to be something that we're not. I'm also very much guilty of that. But this was to the point that you feel so segregated and that it's so empty that I think I'm still working on getting through that. And for 2 years I played keys at this church. And one of the biggest things I learned is that I learned about 3 things. Jesus loved me, that he died for my sins, and that we prioritise about 30 to 40 minutes of worship with your hands in the air over a 15-minute message, where it's basically the same thing. And I'm blessed in that I never questioned God's existence. I've never questioned any of that. I've questioned God, I've questioned his motives, I've questioned, am I really worth saving? But I'd never questioned who he was. At this point, I'm still very stuck in my mental health journey. And at a point in my life where all I wanted was to break this journey. I was the same cycle. It was like a 3-year rotation of what my cycle was. And in came Cody. And that was, it was literally within a week of just going, I can't do this anymore. Therapy's done. That's pointless. And in came Cody. Now, I won't give him all the credit for doing all the work, but he did help on quite a lot. He was the first person that I allowed to actually love me. He was the first person that I accepted I can be loved. As I pretty much said, I can't be loved. I'm unlovable. And he helped me with silly little. I was terrified of red meat for years, since I was about 11 years old. I was terrified of red meat. I'm fully aware what this was all about, but he used to sit there with me and he'd have his hand on my leg while I'm eating, a ham sandwich. It sounds so ridiculous, but to me this was a huge issue. And I was so blessed to have someone that loved me through that, regardless of how grumpy I'd get at him. But we acknowledged we both knew God, and I still believe to this day that God played a massive role in the two of us coming together. It was through a mutual friend, through Cody's camps, that we met each other, and it went from there. But we both lived very selfish lives, as I think most of us do, before coming to the Lord. But in 2018, our lives did a complete turnaround. We'd been together for about 7 years. We had 2 young kids. Our life was in complete shambles. There was lies, there was deceit, there was addiction, there was fear, there was abuse, and it was completely dysfunctional. Our lives were entirely about ourselves and not about our kids and not about the future of our kids. I was back into that mode of being so insecure that I would pander to Cody because I just was so feared that he's going to leave me. He's not going to love me. I'm not perfect enough. And that narrative had returned into my brain that I'm just not good enough. And I would lie to keep him happy. I would lie about where money was going. I would lie about all these things just to keep him happy because I was so incredibly terrified that he would walk away. Everything kind of came to a head, and there was a point where suddenly we had no car, we had no house, we were in debt, and we actually couldn't be near each other. We spent some time apart, and it was during this time that Cody actually called out to the Lord. If you haven't watched his testimony, it's on the website. And Cody called out to the Lord, and I think from that moment on, it started this spiral. We ended up moving to my nan's place down on the Mornington Peninsula, and God was well and truly in that building. And Cody was making all these leaps and bounds in his faith. He was reading the Bible, he was doing all this stuff, and I'm lagging at the back, still trying to cope with what we've just gone through. As mums know, you try and present yourself, you have to be together for your kids all the time, and your issues always get put on the back burner. And we stayed at my nan's house, and it was during this time Cody and I would fight every night without fail. And I can't even remember what half of it was about, to be completely honest with you. But there was one night where the fighting had just got that much that I just turned around and I said, I give up. I just handed over to God. I can't do this. I can't. And I remember being in tears with him sitting out in my nan's couch, and we went outside and we prayed together. And it was that moment where I'm like, okay, I'm going to walk this with you. I'm going to do it with you. I'm not going to help you from my therapy mind. I'm going to help you and walk with you towards God. And eventually, shortly after, we'd moved from my nan's to Cody's dad's place. And within a month, we now had a new car. We had a roof over our heads. We had absolutely no debt. And we were now at a godly church. And this was in a month of the two of us coming to the Lord. And I'm not going to turn around and say that my journey has then been this rapid incline. And I look at Cody's and I'm thinking, oh, it's not fair. Mine has been this very slow progression. But I still struggle with a lot of the things that I have. But the difference is that now there's always this underlying calmness. As we all know, COVID was full on for all of us. And I think that had it not been for God and that underlying calmness, that underlying peace that everything is okay, everything is going as planned, I honestly reckon I would have gone the other way. I would have just been a mental mess. In John 16:33, Jesus does say that in the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer because I've overcome the world. And that's such a comfort, because we can't sit there and say, oh, life's going to be easy now because we've got God. It's not. But he has a plan for us, and he knows where we're going. And all he really wants for us is just peace. But we have to work to get there. We're going to go through struggles. And I find that no matter of how much of an awful person I believe myself to be, and I deal with it daily, I know that Jesus obviously thinks I'm not. And that's still something I have to wrestle with occasionally, but I have such comfort in that I'm not as bad as I think I am. Even in the last 2 years, my growth has changed phenomenally. Things that were my favourite scriptures then, I've now realised are not at all what I thought, because contextually I was fed these things, and then that's not what they're about. I now have new things that I enjoy reading about the Bible, and I feel now I understand, and I read things in context. I read and I get so much more out of it now. And I feel now that I'm included. I always thought that Jesus died for everyone. He loves you all, except me. I don't know why I'm special, but that's just what I thought. And I don't necessarily believe that now. I struggle with it, but I don't necessarily. And I know that I'm included now when Jesus says that he loves us and he died for us. Up until recently, I was still on antidepressants. It was a journey that I kind of went, I'm too scared to do this. But I firmly believed that my journey was not going to change unless I went off them. 17 years I'd been on antidepressants, and a very heavy dose. And about 8 weeks ago, I decided to come off them, cold turkey. It was a lot. The physical symptoms were a lot, and I'm still having to deal with the mental change. I'm still having to grasp that, but I firmly believe that was an impossible thing without God. And God didn't just make it. I was convinced. I said to Cody, it's going to be 2 weeks, I'm going to be bedridden, I'm going to be this, I couldn't stand up straight. I've done it in the past. I couldn't stand without feeling like I'm bumping into things. And God made it that I was actually able to conquer so much more. My back went, literally the Monday I decided to stop, I had a pinched nerve in my back, and I laughed. And I went, really, are you going to make it this hard? And the blessing is that I look back at it, and it was a week, and it was horrible, but I got through it. And now I feel that freedom of I'm not connected to that anymore. And as I said, I still struggle, but I have peace in knowing in Philippians 4:6, it says, be careful for nothing, but everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known unto God. And I feel I don't have to book therapy appointments anymore. I don't have to work to pay the extortionate amount for psychologist appointments. And I don't have to pay for someone to listen to this internal jabbering that goes on all the time anymore. I have a God who's there 24/7, who knows what I'm going to say when I can't get it out. He already knows what it is. And he still loves me, and he still guides me, and I will eternally be grateful for that. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Juliet. Wonderful blessing to see how God can change lives. And for anybody who knows people that have been on antidepressants knows how difficult that is to be able to get off. It is a drug of addiction without question. And going cold turkey, although you did bring your dose down to a certain point, didn't you? Yeah. And it's only the Lord can, to feel like a normal person where you actually do go through depression and then come out of it through the Lord is also a wonderful blessing. We can't be always living on this high plane. So thank you so much, Juliet. That was a real blessing. I have another one, and thank you for your patience this morning. We had missed last week, but I do have another one that I really want to hear. You heard our brother Wes's testimony the week before. I want to invite Rose to come up and also share hers.